Billionaire CEO didn't know he had triplets until the mother approached him at the lavish yacht party. But before we dive into the full story, let me know where you're watching from and what time it is. Now subscribe to the channel and let's get started. The late afternoon sun bathed the yacht in a golden glow as Alexander Sterling moved through the crowd with practiced ease. Laughter and soft music mingled in the salty air, and every polished detail of the vessel spoke of wealth and precision. Guests in elegant attire sipped champagne and exchanged pleasantries on the sun-drenched deck, their voices rising and falling like the gentle waves beneath the yacht. Alexander, the epitome of modern success, greeted influential figures and business magnates with a polite smile, his confident stride never faltering despite the undercurrent of expectations that his presence always brought. Alexander's eyes, however, betrayed a quiet intensity behind the measured calm. He paused momentarily at the edge of the deck, letting the scene wash over him, a panoramic view of glittering water and a distant cityscape setting the stage for a night that promised both glamour and intrigue. In that fleeting moment, the steady rhythm of the ocean and the chatter of the guests provided a comforting backdrop to his otherwise meticulously controlled life. Yet, even as he engaged in light-hearted conversation, a sense of something unresolved tugged at the edges of his mind. Among the crowd, familiar faces like Valerie Monroe gave him subtle nods, their eyes glinting with both respect and a hint of concealed rivalry. Her presence always managed to be both reassuring and unnerving, as though she knew more about the shifting tides of his world than she let on. They exchanged brief, charged greetings that hinted at an alliance forged over years of shared ambition and possibly shared secrets. Seeking a brief respite from the bustling deck, Alexander slipped away to the yacht's upper deck, a quieter refuge where the sun's rays and the whisper of the wind invited introspection. Standing alone near the rail, he allowed himself a rare moment of vulnerability. The steady hum of the party faded into the background as he closed his eyes, feeling the gentle breeze mingle with his thoughts. For a man used to command and certainty, these quiet instants were both a solace and a reminder of the fragility hidden beneath his polished exterior. His solitude was abruptly interrupted by the sound of measured footsteps approaching. Turning slowly, Alexander's gaze met that of a striking woman who exuded a confidence and determination that matched his own. Her presence was magnetic, a blend of poise and urgency that demanded attention. Her dark eyes held secrets, and her expression was one of quiet resolve. Dressed in a sleek, tailored outfit that hinted at both sophistication and a readiness for confrontation, she carried herself with an air of inevitability. "Mr. Sterling?" she began, her voice steady yet laced with an intensity that made Alexander's pulse quicken. "I believe we need to talk." He regarded her with a mixture of curiosity and caution. "And who might you be?" he asked, his tone polite but edged with guarded interest. "My name is Isabella," she replied simply. There was no elaboration, no wasted time on pleasantries, just the calm assertion of a truth that was about to upend his carefully ordered life. Before he could press further, Isabella reached into a slim, elegant purse at her side and withdrew a small, neatly folded envelope. With deliberate grace, she extended it toward him. "You may not remember our past, Mr. Sterling, but I assure you it is one you should not forget," she said, her gaze unwavering as it locked onto his. Alexander's brow furrowed as he accepted the envelope, feeling an immediate chill despite the warm air. His mind raced to decipher her words. There was something disconcerting in the certainty of her tone, an unspoken promise that this was not merely a social call but a revelation of something much deeper. He broke the seal with trembling fingers, unfolding the document within. His eyes widened as he scanned the contents. Old records, faded photographs, and handwritten notes that painted an unmistakable picture of a past he had long suppressed. The evidence was irrefutable. He was the father of triplets. For a long, suspended moment, the vibrant sounds of the party seemed to fade into a muted backdrop. Alexander's confident facade began to crumble, replaced by a dawning shock that left him reeling. His mind churned with a tumult of disbelief, confusion, and a deep underlying anxiety about the implications. Around him, guests continued their lively chatter, unaware of the personal storm that had just been unleashed in their midst. Noticing his sudden stillness, a few nearby guests exchanged furtive glances. The intimacy of whispered conversations and subtle looks now carried an edge of curiosity. One such glance came from Valerie Monroe, who, standing a short distance away, seemed to silently communicate both concern and a quiet satisfaction. Later, in a private moment away from the public gaze, she approached him. "Alexander, are you all right?" Valerie asked softly, her tone a blend of empathy and caution. "I heard murmurs. Is everything truly as it seems?" Alexander struggled to find his voice, still processing the shock of Isabella's revelation. I'm not sure," he admitted in a low, uncertain tone, his eyes fixed on the document that now lay heavily in his hand. "This can't be. It must be a mistake." But Isabella's gaze did not waver. "I wouldn't call it a mistake, Mr. Sterling," she said firmly. "The evidence is clear, and it's not just about the triplets. There are questions about your past, questions you've tried to bury." Her words struck him like a bolt of lightning. The cheerful ambiance of the yacht party, the clinking of glasses, and the easy laughter of the crowd all began to blur into insignificance against the gravity of her statement. In that moment, every detail, the soft rustle of silk dresses, the glint of expensive jewelry, the polished veneer of success, seemed to mock him, reminding him of the life he had meticulously built and now risked unraveling. "Why now?" Alexander finally managed to ask, his voice barely above a whisper, betraying his internal turmoil. "After all these years, why bring this up tonight?" Isabella's response was measured, almost sorrowful. "Because you must confront your responsibilities, Mr. Sterling. You can't continue living in the past you chose to ignore. The time for secrets has long passed." Their exchange was interrupted by the subtle but perceptible shift in the atmosphere. Party guests began to lean in closer, their eyes flickering with interest, as if privy to an unfolding drama that reached far beyond idle gossip. In that charged moment, the yacht's deck transformed from a stage of carefree luxury into a crucible of destiny. Alexander's mind whirled with conflicting emotions as he reread the document. Each line, each faded signature, was a reminder of a life he had once known and a family he never acknowledged. The hum of conversation around him faded into an oppressive silence, punctuated only by the occasional clink of a glass or the murmur of hushed voices discussing the sudden tension in the air. Isabella's steady presence, her unwavering eyes, continued to pierce through the tumult. "You must decide now," she insisted, her voice both challenging and compassionate. "Your future, and the well-being of those who depend on you, hangs in the balance." Unable to bear the weight of the scrutiny any longer, Alexander excused himself from the growing throng of curious onlookers. With a heavy heart and mind racing with doubts and long-forgotten memories, he sought refuge in a quieter corner of the yacht. There, away from the probing eyes and whispered speculations, he allowed himself a brief moment of solitude. He leaned against the polished wood of a secluded balcony railing, the gentle sway of the vessel beneath him echoing the turbulence of his thoughts. As dusk deepened into twilight, the luxurious vessel sailed steadily toward the horizon, its path lit by the muted glow of city lights far below. The initial glamour of the party had given way to an undercurrent of foreboding, a palpable shift that was impossible to ignore. Alexander's heart pounded with the realization that his life was about to change irrevocably. The cool evening breeze carried whispers of long-hidden secrets, stirring memories that he had desperately tried to keep buried. In that still, reflective moment, with the document still open in his hand and the echoes of Isabella's words resonating within him, Alexander felt an inescapable pull towards the uncertain future. The night held promises of revelations yet to come and dangers that lurked behind every carefully crafted facade. In the fading light, Alexander clutches the document with trembling fingers, his mind racing as he hears hushed whispers among the guests, a promise that tonight is only the beginning of a much deeper, dangerous secret. The first light of dawn filtered through the towering glass facade of Sterling Industries headquarters, casting long shadows on the polished marble floors. In his expansive corner office, Alexander Sterling sat silently, staring out over the city's skyline as if searching for answers in the awakening urban sprawl. The memory of the previous night's revelatory events still clung to him, each detail as vivid as the first rays of sunlight piercing through the darkness. In his hand, the document Isabella had presented the night before trembled slightly, its ink and faded notes blurring before his eyes as his mind raced with a turbulent mix of disbelief and dread. He reached out slowly, rereading the lines that had shattered his meticulously constructed world. The realization that he was the father of triplets, 3 lives he had never known, hit him again, each word echoing in his mind with relentless force. The contrast between the opulent revelry of the yacht party and the stark reality of the document before him was jarring. The shimmering images of champagne flutes and joyous laughter now seemed distant, replaced by a cold, unyielding truth. A sharp ring cut through the silence, jolting him from his reverie. He answered on the second ring, his voice low and measured. "Sterling." On the other end, the calm but urgent tone of his trusted advisor, Marcus, filled the line. "Alexander, there are murmurs spreading through the board. It seems the revelations from last night have sparked a firestorm already. Some of the board members are questioning your judgment, and there are whispers that this might be more than a personal issue. It could affect the company's future." Alexander ran a hand through his hair, the weight of Marcus's words settling over him like an unwelcome shroud. "I understand, Marcus. I'll handle it. Keep me updated on any developments." As he ended the call, he set the phone aside with deliberate care, rising from his sleek leather chair. Determination mingled with a deep-seated uncertainty as he strode purposefully through the marble corridors of the headquarters. His footsteps echoed in the hushed halls, a stark reminder of both his power and the isolation that now threatened to engulf him. Inside the boardroom, the atmosphere was charged with a palpable tension. Executives sat around a long, oval table, their faces a mix of guarded skepticism and thinly veiled curiosity. Alexander took his place at the head of the table, the document from Isabella discreetly stowed in a leather folder beside his laptop. As the meeting commenced, voices murmured with barely contained concern. "Alexander, about last night," began one board member, his tone formal yet edged with doubt. "There are serious questions regarding your decision-making and the implications this might have on our investments." Another executive, his eyes narrowing, added, "If these allegations are true, it undermines not just your personal integrity, but the trust that our shareholders have in Sterling Industries." The room buzzed with low conversations, the kind of hushed exchanges that spoke of both opportunistic ambitions and genuine worry. Alexander listened carefully, his expression inscrutable. He attempted to project the same confidence that had earned him his reputation, though internally he grappled with a maelstrom of conflicting emotions. Valerie Monroe, seated directly across from him, leaned forward slightly, her voice soft yet laden with unspoken meaning. "Alexander, perhaps it's time to acknowledge that your personal life and your professional responsibilities are not as separate as you might have believed. In times like these, transparency can be your greatest asset." Her words, though supportive on the surface, carried an undercurrent that hinted at deeper corporate rivalries and the potential exploitation of his newfound vulnerability. Alexander met her gaze, silently acknowledging the complexity of her message. In that moment, the boardroom felt less like a chamber of business decisions and more like a battleground where every word could tip the scales of power. As the meeting continued, the atmosphere grew increasingly frigid. Whispers turned to pointed questions, and Alexander found himself on the defensive. A flurry of accusations and guarded stares from various corners of the table underscored the severity of the situation. Some executives expressed sympathy, while others seemed poised to seize upon his moment of weakness to further their own ambitions. Midway through the meeting, Alexander excused himself briefly. He stepped away to a quiet corner of the boardroom, where the hum of anxious conversation faded into a distant murmur. There, the strain etched across his face became unmistakably clear. His eyes, usually so commanding, now betrayed a hint of uncertainty and concern as he contemplated the far-reaching implications of Isabella's revelation. Returning to his seat, he was greeted by an unexpected discovery. On the sleek surface of his desk lay a neatly folded piece of paper he hadn't noticed before, a handwritten note in an unfamiliar, careful script. He unfolded it slowly, his eyes scanning the message. The note was brief, yet its tone was ominous. Some truths are not as accidental as they appear. Be wary of who stands beside you. The words sent a shiver down his spine, suggesting that the personal crisis unfolding in his life might be intertwined with a larger, more deliberate scheme. Before he could dwell further on the note, his phone buzzed with a new call. Alexander answered without hesitation, the line crackling with static before a low, almost imperceptible voice spoke. "Mr. Sterling, there are secrets yet to be uncovered about the Triplets' origins. The path you're on is paved with more than mere coincidence." The call ended abruptly, leaving Alexander with more questions than answers. The anonymous warning resonated deeply, feeding the growing unease that his life was entangled in layers of deceit that extended far beyond a single personal scandal. Returning to his office after the meeting, Alexander found himself surrounded by reminders of a bygone era, a collection of framed photographs showcasing milestones of his earlier career, accolades that had once symbolized triumph and leadership. Now each image served as a stark reminder of the distance between the man he once was and the man facing this crisis. The familiarity of the room, filled with memories of success, clashed violently with the looming specter of scandal that now threatened to dismantle everything he had built. Sitting down at his desk once more, Alexander's thoughts drifted back to better times in the boardroom. He recalled moments of hearty laughter during celebratory dinners, the camaraderie that had once defined his interactions with trusted colleagues. Those days felt distant now, a stark contrast to the cold, calculating glances and whispered suspicions that greeted him in every corner of the company. In a rare moment of vulnerability, he allowed himself a small exhalation of frustration. How had his carefully managed world unraveled so swiftly? Each accusation, every veiled threat, cut deeper than the last, eroding the certainty that had long been his shield. Amid this internal storm, Valerie's discreet presence offered a semblance of stability. Later that afternoon, as the boardroom emptied and the echoes of heated discussions faded, she approached him in the quiet solitude of a side corridor. "Alexander, I know this is a difficult time," she said softly, her tone carrying genuine concern. "But sometimes, acknowledging our vulnerabilities can be the first step toward reclaiming control. I'm here if you need anything at all." Her words, though kind, came with an undertone that hinted at unspoken motives. Alexander managed a tight smile, grateful for her support, yet aware that in this new reality, every gesture might carry hidden implications. "Thank you, Valerie," he replied, his voice steady despite the tumult within. "I appreciate your support more than you know." As the day waned, the final remnants of the board meeting's tension lingered like a stubborn shadow. Alone in the vast conference room, now empty except for a few scattered chairs and the residual energy of unresolved conflicts, Alexander stood at the head of the table. His mind churned with the weight of whispered accusations and the relentless pressure of a scandal that threatened to consume both his personal and professional lives. The once clear line between business and personal affairs had blurred, leaving him to navigate a labyrinth of trust, betrayal, and hidden agendas. In that silent, solemn space, Alexander felt the full impact of the cascading crises. The towering windows offered a view of the city's glittering lights, yet they did little to dispel the darkness gathering within him. Every whispered remark and every skeptical glance had compounded his growing isolation. It was as if the very foundations of his empire were cracking under the strain of secrets that had long been left to fester. Just when the oppressive solitude seemed unbearable, a sudden ominous knock on his office door interrupts his solitude, a visitor bearing an urgent message that suggests the scandal is only the tip of a much larger, dangerous conspiracy. After that fateful boardroom encounter, Alexander's mind was a maelstrom of unanswered questions and unhealed wounds. Late that evening, as the city's lights began to dim into the quiet pulse of night, he returned to his office determined to seek answers. He hadn't yet shaken the memory of the urgent visitor's knock, a knock that had promised a conspiracy far deeper than personal scandal. Before he could even settle into his solitude, he opened the door and was met by a slight, hooded figure. The messenger's eyes darted around before pressing a small, weathered envelope into Alexander's hand. "Mr. Sterling," the messenger whispered, his voice barely audible, "this is for you. There are truths that have long been hidden. Do not ignore what you find inside." With that, the messenger melted away into the dim corridor, leaving Alexander alone with his thoughts and the envelope clutched tightly in his grasp. Retreating to his private study, Alexander set the envelope on his antique mahogany desk and slowly began to open it. Inside were several aged letters tied with a faded ribbon, along with a handful of sepia-toned photographs. His fingers trembled as he unfolded the first letter, its ink smudged with time. The script spoke of a secret romance, a romance so fervent and forbidden that it had been carefully concealed from the world. Each word evoked memories he had long since buried. One photograph in particular caught his eye, a smiling young man, his features softer and less guarded, standing beside a woman whose gentle, captivating smile hinted at a future full of promise. The letter's words transported him back to a time when life had been less about board meetings and corporate empires and more about passion and unbridled possibility. A rush of recollection flooded him. He remembered that summer, the intoxicating days when he had been a carefree youth, swept away by dreams and the laughter of someone who once meant the world to him. That mysterious woman, whose name now hovered unspoken in his memory, had been his confidant, his joy, and perhaps the keeper of a secret that could shatter the carefully constructed narrative of his life. Unable to contain the pull of these long-forgotten memories, Alexander decided to take a drive. The city's neon reflections blurred past the windshield as he navigated a deserted boulevard at midnight. The rhythmic hum of the engine became a backdrop for his thoughts. With each mile, the tension in his chest eased slightly as memories unfurled like old film reels. In the quiet solitude of the open road, the images of sunlit afternoons and whispered conversations drifted back to him. He recalled the laughter, the stolen moments, and the promises that now seemed as ephemeral as mist. Every streetlight, every passing shadow, was a reminder of a past that he had tried so desperately to forget. When the drive ended, Alexander found himself drawn to a small, secluded cafe tucked away in an older part of the city. The establishment, with its vintage charm and soft jazz playing in the background, exuded a sense of nostalgia and quiet secrecy. Inside, he was greeted by a familiar face, a long-time family friend, Samuel, whose eyes held both warmth and a trace of sorrow. Samuel had known him since before the world of power and corporate ambition had overtaken his life. As they sat in a quiet booth in the back, the low murmur of other patrons providing a cocoon of privacy, Alexander broached the subject of his mysterious past. "Samuel," Alexander began hesitantly, "do you recall a time, many years ago, when I—" when I was not the man I am now? There were whispers of a romance, a relationship that was more than just a fleeting dalliance. Samuel's eyes flickered with a mixture of surprise and guarded concern. "Yes, I do remember," he said slowly, choosing his words with care. "There was a time when you fell deeply in love with a woman whose spirit was as free as the wind. But that love, as beautiful as it was, threatened to disrupt everything you had built. It was a delicate matter, one that was hidden away from the public eye." He paused, glancing around as if fearful of eavesdroppers. Some would say that love, when it burns too brightly, can cast a shadow that lingers for a lifetime. The conversation stirred something within Alexander, a realization that perhaps the secrets of his past were not merely personal missteps, but part of a larger tapestry of choices and sacrifices made long ago. With Samuel's confirmation echoing in his mind, Alexander knew he had to revisit the place where it all began. The next day, he found himself driving to an old estate on the outskirts of the city, a property he vaguely remembered as a backdrop to whispered rumors and half-forgotten promises. The estate, now cloaked in the patina of time, exuded an air of faded grandeur. The wrought-iron gate creaked ominously as he pushed it open, and a narrow path led him to the main building. Each step on the gravel pathway was laden with the weight of history and unspoken regret. Inside, the mansion was shrouded in dust and silence. The echo of his footsteps on the wooden floors reminded him of the past's persistence. In one dimly lit corridor, he discovered a door slightly ajar. Pushing it open, he entered a forgotten room filled with relics of bygone days, old portraits, delicate trinkets, and stacks of yellowed papers. As he walked among these artifacts, his eyes caught sight of a small, leather-bound diary hidden behind a stack of brittle letters. Its cover was worn, and the pages within were filled with the hurried, looping script of someone who had once bared their soul. Alexander sank into a creaking armchair, the diary resting on his lap as he carefully turned the pages. The entries spoke of passion, regret, and a hidden connection that went beyond simple romance. The diary hinted that the mysterious woman, Isabella, might have been part of something much larger, a legacy tied to dangerous forces and secrets that still pulsed beneath the surface of his life. Each entry was a puzzle piece, revealing a fragment of a past he had long denied. The raw emotions in the diary stirred a complex blend of nostalgia and sorrow in him, making it clear that his past was more intertwined with his present than he had ever imagined. Lost in these revelations, Alexander was suddenly interrupted by the sharp ring of his cell phone. The call came from an unknown number, and when he answered, a voice shrouded in urgency and mystery spoke. "Mr. Sterling, you must look deeper into the hidden chapters of your history. There are forces at work that you have yet to comprehend." The line went dead, leaving Alexander with a lingering chill and a mind racing with questions. Outside, dark clouds had begun to gather, mirroring the turbulent emotions roiling within him. Determined to corroborate the clues from the diary, Alexander made his way to a modest urban archive, a small, unassuming building where the records of the past were meticulously kept. Inside, amidst rows of ancient files and dusty documents, he pored over records of family histories and property deeds. His heart sank as he uncovered discrepancies in his family tree, gaps and irregularities that hinted at a manipulation of his past, a deliberate effort to obscure the truth about his origins. Each new discovery was a revelation, a thread that connected him to a time when his life was not governed solely by ambition and power. Regret and anger warred within him as he realized that the past had been carefully curated, that someone had orchestrated events to shape him into the man he had become. It was as if his entire identity had been built on a foundation of secrets and half-truths. In the quiet solitude of his study later that evening, Alexander sat surrounded by the relics of his former life, a collection of letters, photographs, and the now well-worn diary. The glow from a single desk lamp illuminated his determined face as he resolved to uncover every hidden truth, no matter how painful or perilous the journey might be. His thoughts turned inevitably to the triplets, the unexpected consequence of a past he had tried to bury. Could it be that their existence was part of a larger, more insidious design? With a deep, steadying breath, he turned the pages of the diary one final time. The entries, filled with cryptic references and emotional outbursts, finally led him to a torn page, a fragment that seemed to hold the key to everything. As thunder rumbles outside, Alexander's trembling hand stops on a final torn page of the diary, one that names a secret benefactor whose identity could unravel everything he believes about himself. Alexander drove slowly down a quiet suburban street, the hum of the city far behind him. The endless concrete and steel of his corporate world gave way to neatly trimmed lawns, modest homes, and a gentleness that felt both foreign and strangely inviting. The car's tires crunched softly over the asphalt as he navigated past tidy hedges and flowering gardens, a stark contrast to the high-stakes boardrooms and sleek corridors he was accustomed to. His destination was a modest house tucked away on a tree-lined avenue. As he pulled into the gravel driveway, a wave of trepidation mixed with an inexplicable pull of curiosity washed over him. Here, in this unassuming neighborhood, lay the family he never knew he had, the triplets who had unexpectedly tethered his past to his present. Taking a deep breath, Alexander stepped out of his car. The cool air carried a hint of freshly cut grass and blooming flowers, a reminder that life continued in simple rhythms despite the chaos of his corporate empire. Standing before the modest front door, he hesitated, his heart pounding with both anticipation and uncertainty. The door itself was weathered and unpretentious, a far cry from the polished glass facades of his office buildings. A gentle knock on the door broke his reverie. Almost immediately, the door opened to reveal a kind-faced caretaker whose warm smile seemed to bridge the gap between the stranger and the familiar. "Mr. Sterling, I've been expecting you," she said softly, her eyes kind yet laced with the weight of unspoken secrets. "Please, come in." Inside, the atmosphere was imbued with a quiet warmth. The living room was adorned with childhood photographs, faded mementos, and simple decor that spoke of a family steeped in both love and mystery. The air was perfumed with the gentle scent of old books and homemade cooking, a stark, grounding contrast to the sterile, impersonal spaces Alexander had grown accustomed to. As he moved further into the house, he heard the sound of small voices and the patter of little feet. Rounding a corner, he found himself in a softly lit room where 3 children played quietly. The triplets, each bearing a distinct glimmer of curiosity and caution in their eyes, stood together, their expressions a mixture of wonder and guarded reserve. Their presence was simultaneously joyful and enigmatic, a living reminder of the life that had taken shape without his knowledge. The oldest, a thoughtful boy with wide, questioning eyes, stepped forward hesitantly. "Are you Dad?" he asked, his voice trembling between hope and disbelief. His words hung in the air like a fragile promise. Alexander felt as if time had momentarily stilled. Here he was, the powerful, self-assured CEO, and yet in this moment, he was also a man confronted with the raw vulnerability of fatherhood. His mind raced as he searched for the right words, but the gravity of the situation left him momentarily speechless. Finally, he managed a gentle, uncertain smile. "Yes," he said quietly, his voice imbued with a mix of regret and tentative hope. "I'm your father." A silence fell over the room, a silence filled with the weight of years lost and possibilities yet to be fulfilled. Then, as if on cue, the room seemed to exhale a breath of cautious acceptance. The other 2 children, their eyes shimmering with unshed tears and unspoken questions, slowly moved closer. Their tentative steps, full of both joy and apprehension, spoke of a complicated legacy, one marked by absence, secrets, and the hope of a future mending old wounds. In the softly lit living room, the initial awkwardness gave way to tentative introductions and heartfelt conversations. Alexander sat on a comfortable, worn sofa facing the triplets who sat cross-legged on the floor. Their eyes flickered with a mixture of emotions, joy at having a father, confusion over the sudden emergence of a man they barely recognized as part of their life, and a quiet, lingering resentment born of years of abandonment. The caretaker, watching from the background with a knowing expression, offered a gentle interjection. "There's much about your family that you should know," she said kindly. "We've kept memories safe, and sometimes the past holds secrets that are harder to let go of than we'd like." Her words resonated deeply with Alexander. He glanced around the room, taking in every detail, the framed family photographs on a shelf, each capturing moments of shared smiles and quiet celebrations, and the familiar trinkets that hinted at traditions he had been oblivious to. One photograph in particular caught his eye, a snapshot of a family gathering in a sunlit garden where a younger version of himself stood side by side with a woman whose graceful smile and enigmatic eyes spoke of mysteries now long buried. The image stirred a longing and regret he had long suppressed. As the conversation deepened, the triplets began to share their memories. Their voices, though soft and halting at times, carried the weight of lived experience. "I remember when Mama used to tell us stories," the middle child recalled, his eyes distant yet earnest. "She said that family was more than just blood. It was about secrets and strength. But sometimes I wonder why we never had a picture of you in our home." His words were gentle, yet there was an underlying pain that tugged at Alexander's heart. The youngest, barely more than a child, looked up with a mixture of innocent hope and unformed questions. "Do you know her, Daddy? The one who told us the stories?" he asked quietly, his gaze searching Alexander's face for clues. The question, simple yet loaded with unspoken meaning, left Alexander momentarily speechless. He knew that the woman in the photograph, the mother of his children, was part of a past riddled with complexities he had never fully confronted. In that softly lit living room, as the triplets continued to reveal bits of their lives through shy smiles and tentative words, Alexander found himself caught between two worlds. On one side was the man he had built, a titan of industry, a figure of unwavering authority. On the other was a father who had missed out on so much, whose absence had left gaping wounds in the hearts of these children. The contrast was painfully clear, and he struggled to reconcile the image of the powerful CEO with the vulnerable man who now sought to bridge years of separation and silence. The conversation shifted naturally toward family history. The caretaker, who had been quietly observing, decided it was time to share what she knew. "There are things about your family that have been kept secret, Mr. Sterling," she said softly, addressing him with the respect due to his name. "Your connection to these children runs deeper than you might imagine. Some secrets have been guarded for a very long time, and not everything is as simple as it appears." Her words, delivered with a tone of both caution and concern, only deepened the mystery. Alexander listened intently, his mind churning with questions about what might lie hidden beneath the surface of his newfound family. The warmth of the room contrasted with the chill of uncertainty that now seeped into his bones. As the afternoon waned into early evening, a family photo on a shelf caught his eye once again. He reached out, gently tracing the outline of the frame with his fingertips. The photograph depicted a gathering from years past, a moment of togetherness that seemed both precious and painfully elusive. The memories it evoked were bittersweet, a mix of nostalgia for what could have been and regret for opportunities lost. In that moment, Alexander realized that the triplets' existence was not merely a personal anomaly. It was a living testament to a series of choices and sacrifices that had defined his past, choices that now demanded reckoning. Before the fragile reunion could settle into any semblance of normalcy, the sound of a knock at the door broke the quiet. A messenger, appearing unexpectedly at the threshold, handed over a sealed envelope. The messenger's brief presence was enough to stir a ripple of apprehension among those gathered. Alexander accepted the envelope with cautious curiosity, his eyes briefly meeting the messenger's before the visitor melted away into the soft shadows of the hallway. With the envelope now in hand, Alexander unfolded its contents amid the gentle murmur of the room. The message inside was brief, a warning and a revelation all in one. It spoke of hidden connections and hinted that the triplets' existence was intricately tied not only to his past, but also to forces at work within his empire. The revelation unsettled him deeply. It suggested that the family he had just met might be entangled in corporate and personal schemes that reached far beyond the bounds of a simple personal history. Later that evening, as they gathered around a humble dinner table in a cozy kitchen filled with the aroma of home-cooked food, the conversation took on a more intimate tone. The caretaker shared stories of family traditions and long-held secrets, while the triplets exchanged quiet glances that spoke of inner worlds rich with emotion and guarded hope. Amid the clatter of cutlery and soft laughter, it became clear that the children had grown up in an environment where every joy was tempered by the silent weight of mystery, a mystery that now threatened to reshape the very foundation of Alexander's world. Throughout the meal, Alexander's mind was a whirlpool of conflicting emotions. He was filled with hope at the prospect of finally embracing a role he had long been denied, yet dread crept in as the implications of the secret schemes hinted at in the envelope began to take shape. Every shared memory, every tender moment was now laced with the bittersweet knowledge that the legacy he had unknowingly inherited might come at a far greater cost than he ever imagined. When the meal concluded and the triplets began to settle in for the night, Alexander found himself standing by the doorway, reluctant to leave the gentle warmth of the home that now held so many unanswered questions. He knew that the road ahead would be fraught with challenges, not just in the boardrooms and corporate halls he commanded, but also in the delicate, complex world of family ties and hidden agendas that had suddenly become his responsibility. Before leaving, one of the triplets clutches a small, mysterious token in his hand, a token that glows faintly under the light, suggesting a secret connection to a dangerous legacy. Returning to his headquarters with the weight of the token and the secret of the triplets heavy on his mind, Alexander stepped through the revolving doors of Sterling Industries with measured determination. The sleek, glass-encased building towered over the bustling city, its reflective surface mirroring the inner tumult that now defined him. Every step he took through the grand, polished lobby resonated with the silent knowledge that his personal life was about to upend the carefully balanced world of high finance he had built over the years. The following morning, the boardroom was filled with the low hum of whispered concerns and cautious glances. As Alexander took his seat at the head of the expansive oval table, he could immediately sense that the power dynamics had subtly shifted overnight. Senior executives exchanged tense, sideways looks, each glance loaded with quiet calculations. It was as if they had collectively agreed that his personal crisis, a matter that should have remained hidden, was now an open secret ripe for exploitation. During the meeting, the atmosphere was thick with unspoken tension. A hushed conversation between two board members drifted over the low murmur of discussion. "He's been distracted lately," one whispered, his eyes never leaving Alexander's face. "And this is our chance to realign things our way." Another nodded, the weight of ambition hidden behind a veneer of concern. The suggestion was clear. Alexander's vulnerability might be the opportunity they'd been waiting for. Before the debate could spiral further, Valerie Monroe, ever perceptive and commanding, rose to speak. "Alexander," she began, her voice measured and calm, "I believe it's time we address the emerging challenges head-on. We need to recalibrate our strategy, not just for the sake of our shareholders, but for the integrity of Sterling Industries." Her eyes, though warm with apparent support, betrayed a flicker of calculation that Alexander could not ignore. In that moment, he sensed that even those closest to him might be harboring secret ambitions. As the discussion progressed, the meeting devolved into an intense debate over strategic decisions. What began as a discussion about market positioning soon escalated into a collision of personal jabs and veiled accusations. "This isn't merely a numbers game," one executive remarked sharply. "It's a question of leadership, and clearly our leadership is compromised." The air in the room thickened with tension as personal attacks hinted at a larger, more sinister conspiracy at play. Each comment was a double-edged sword, cutting deeper than the last, and Alexander felt the weight of every unspoken betrayal and hidden agenda. Inside, Alexander's thoughts churned with conflict. The role of CEO he had so long embodied with unwavering authority was now inextricably linked with the unforeseen role of a father, a role he had spent years denying. In the depths of his mind, he wrestled with the realization that every decision, every strategy he now formulated was influenced not only by corporate ambition, but also by the tender, fragile hope of reconnecting with the family he never knew. The duality of his existence, balancing boardroom battles with the quiet needs of newfound parenthood, left him feeling torn between duty and the uncharted territory of heart. The meeting's simmering tension was abruptly shattered by the ringing of Alexander's phone. Excusing himself from the charged environment, he stepped into a quiet corridor away from the prying eyes of his colleagues. The call was brief but piercing, a low, urgent message that sent a jolt through his system. "Mr. Sterling, be advised that a sabotage is planned targeting your key assets. Act swiftly." The warning reverberated in his mind, mingling with the earlier murmurings of betrayal and leaving him to wonder who among his inner circle might be orchestrating such a move. Later, as the boardroom emptied and whispers of dissent still lingered in the halls, Alexander wandered through the dim corridors of his headquarters. In one shadowed stretch, he caught sight of a furtive exchange, a shadowy figure slipping confidential documents into the hands of an unknown contact. The brief, silent transaction, illuminated only by the occasional flicker of overhead lights, spoke volumes. It was a clear signal that the planned sabotage was not an isolated act of malice, but part of a broader, carefully orchestrated scheme designed to destabilize him from within. Unable to shake the growing unease, Alexander sought refuge in the solitude of the building's secluded terrace garden. Away from the cold efficiency of the boardroom and the calculated maneuvers of corporate warfare, the garden offered a temporary escape. Here, under a starlit sky and amidst carefully manicured greenery, the urban chaos faded into a distant hum. Settling onto a stone bench, Alexander pulled the mysterious token from his pocket. In the soft glow of the garden lights, the token's light pulsed more intensely than before, as if imbued with a secret of its own. Its glow deepened the sense of foreboding within him, reminding him that the personal revelations and corporate intrigues were now inextricably linked. Before he could dwell too long in the quiet solitude, his phone buzzed once again, a signal for another meeting. This time he found himself in an upscale, quiet lounge arranged specifically for a surprise meeting with one of his most influential investors, Mr. Harrington. Known for his razor-sharp business acumen and an unwavering focus on profitability, Mr. Harrington was a formidable figure in the industry. Over the course of a tense conversation, he wasted no time. "Alexander," he said in a controlled yet urgent tone, "I've been hearing unsettling things. Your personal issues are beginning to affect the company's stability. If you do not regain full control, I fear further disruptions are inevitable." His words, laced with both concern and an unmistakable warning, stung Alexander deeply. It was a reminder that in the world of high finance, personal vulnerabilities could become the lever by which entire empires were toppled. After the meeting with Mr. Harrington, Alexander made his way back into the building. In the quiet corridor, he noticed a brief, meaningful exchange between Valerie and another senior executive. Their eyes met for just a moment, a discreet, charged glance that spoke of secret alliances and hidden strategies. It was a small moment, almost imperceptible, but it added another layer to the web of intrigue that was closing in around him. Doubt gnawed at him. Could those he trusted be working in concert against him? The day's tensions escalated further when, in the grand lobby of Sterling Industries, Alexander nearly came to blows with an aggressive rival. In a charged moment of confrontation, the rival, famed for his combative manner and unyielding ambition, stepped forward with a glare that practically screamed defiance. The air crackled with unspoken threats as their eyes locked, and for a few heartbeats, the entire space seemed to pause in anticipation. Their body language, stiff and confrontational, left no doubt. This was a battle not fought with words alone, but with the very essence of their wills clashing in silent opposition. As the day wore on and the relentless pressure of corporate warfare bore down upon him, Alexander retreated to his office. In the quiet solitude of his private space, he allowed himself a moment of reflection. The events of the day, from the unsettling whispers in the boardroom to the covert exchanges in shadowed corridors, and from the ominous phone call to the tense standoff in the lobby, had coalesced into a single, undeniable truth. His empire was under threat from multiple fronts. And yet, amidst the swirling chaos, a resolute determination began to emerge within him. He realized that he could not afford to be paralyzed by indecision or fear. The responsibilities of a CEO were now intertwined with those of a father, and he was determined to fight back. Every strategy he devised, every decision he made, would now be fueled by a steadfast resolve to protect both his corporate legacy and the new family that had unexpectedly become a part of his life. That evening, as Alexander reviews the glowing token in the quiet of his office, he receives an anonymous text message that ominously states, "The danger isn't just corporate, it's personal." The night was long and restless for Alexander. Shadows danced along the walls of his penthouse as he lay awake, tormented by visions of faceless figures whispering secrets and threats in a language he couldn't quite decipher. The silence of his luxurious room was broken only by the persistent hum of the city below, a constant reminder that even in the stillness, danger might be lurking in every corner of his vast empire. Sleep evaded him as thoughts of betrayal and hidden agendas churned relentlessly in his mind. When dawn finally broke, the first rays of light revealed a note left on his desk, a note so unexpected it sent a chill down his spine. The paper, neat and unassuming, bore a single terse message: "Trust no one. Your enemies are closer than you think." The handwriting was unfamiliar, but its tone was unmistakably ominous. Alexander's pulse quickened as he read the words over and over, each repetition reinforcing his growing suspicion that someone in his inner circle was not who they appeared to be. Unable to shake the disquiet, Alexander set out for a discreet meeting at an upscale cafe he had frequented in quieter times. It was a place of soft jazz, polished wood, and hushed conversations, a refuge from the sterile corridors of corporate power. There he was to meet Daniel, a longtime confidant whose loyalty had always been a cornerstone of his support system. Yet today, something felt different. Daniel's expression was guarded, his eyes darting away whenever Alexander mentioned the recent string of unsettling events. Over steaming cups of black coffee, Alexander leaned forward, his voice low. "Daniel, have you noticed anything off lately? Whispers about leaks in our ranks? I received a note this morning. Something tells me there's more than just idle gossip at play." Daniel shifted uncomfortably in his seat. I have heard some things, but you know how these things go, Alex. Sometimes it's just paranoia mixing with the pressure. But now that you mention it, there have been some inconsistencies. People who used to be steadfast seem a bit too eager to keep their heads down, and some of our numbers don't add up as they should. The evasiveness in Daniel's tone only deepened Alexander's suspicions. Half-truths and nervous glances were never the mark of a true ally, and now even a trusted friend's words began to feel laced with something sinister. Finishing his coffee with a tight smile, Alexander left the cafe feeling more isolated than ever, the weight of the anonymous warning heavy on his conscience. Back at his headquarters, a low-key lunchtime briefing was convened in one of the less formal meeting rooms. Alexander sat around a table with his closest advisors, carefully studying their expressions. There was an undercurrent of tension, a mixture of furtive looks and hesitant voices that suggested secrets were being guarded with every fiber of their being. As the conversation meandered through routine updates, the mood grew increasingly somber. In a quiet corner of the room, one advisor whispered urgently to another about a leak of confidential information that had reached the ears of competitors. The words were soft, but the implication was clear. Someone was betraying them from the inside. Later, in a secluded corridor off the main boardroom, Alexander found himself face-to-face with a trusted executive he had long relied upon. The confrontation was sudden and stark, a hushed exchange that shattered the pretense of loyalty. The executive's eyes were downcast as he murmured, I had no choice. They were watching, and I thought I could contain it." The weight of that admission, delivered in a barely audible tone, confirmed for Alexander that betrayal was not only real, but imminent. His heart pounded with a mix of anger and sorrow. How could someone he had trusted so completely be complicit in undermining everything he had built? Unable to dismiss the feeling that the very foundation of his inner circle was crumbling, Alexander retreated to his private study. There, in the quiet solitude of his personal sanctuary, he retrieved the anonymous note from his desk. The crisp paper and its stark message seemed to glow with a foreboding energy in the soft lamplight. As he read and reread each word, the note's threat reverberated through him. Every syllable was a reminder that the enemy was not some distant rival, but a presence nestled among those he considered friends. Before he could process his thoughts further, his phone buzzed with an incoming call. The caller ID was obscured, and when he answered, a distorted voice filled the line. "Mr. Sterling, you must choose your allies wisely. Time is running out, and the truth is hidden behind a veil of deceit. Decide now. Who will you trust before it's too late?" The call ended abruptly, leaving Alexander with a sense of urgency that pressed upon him like a physical weight. The voice was cold, measured, and the demand implicit in its words sent a clear message. The decisions he made in the coming hours could determine the survival of not just his company, but his very legacy. Stepping away from the study, Alexander moved to the large windows of his office. The sprawling city below, indifferent to the internal storm raging within his walls, provided a stark contrast to his inner turmoil. He watched as the morning bustle continued unabated, oblivious to the silent battle being waged behind the glass. In that moment, the indifferent urban landscape seemed a world away from the intricate web of betrayal that now threatened his empire. Determined to understand the full scope of the treachery, Alexander arranged a meeting with a discreet security consultant known only as Martin. In a quiet, secure room away from prying eyes, Martin laid out a series of disturbing patterns and irregularities. "Mr. Sterling," he explained, pointing to a series of interconnected graphs and digital logs, "there have been multiple instances of data breaches and unusual network activity. It appears that someone with deep access, someone from within, has been siphoning off sensitive information. This isn't random. It's systematic sabotage, orchestrated by someone who knows exactly where to strike." The consultant's measured tone and the cold logic of his presentation confirmed Alexander's worst fears. The enemy was not an external force, but a hidden faction within his own ranks. The revelation left Alexander reeling, and as the consultant finished his report, he summoned Valerie Monroe for a private conversation. In the quiet, charged atmosphere of his office, Valerie's expression was enigmatic. They stood close, the tension palpable between them. "Valerie," Alexander said quietly, "I need to know where you stand. Are you truly with me, or are you—" He hesitated, unable to finish the question as the silence stretched between them. Valerie's eyes, dark and inscrutable, met his steadily. "Alex, I've always been on your side," she replied softly, though her tone carried an undercurrent of something else, an unspoken admission of the complexities that lay beneath the surface. "But in times like these, trust is a fragile commodity. I'm here, and I will do everything in my power to help, but you must be prepared for hard truths." Her words, while ostensibly reassuring, left Alexander with a lingering doubt. Could she be playing a double role, or was she simply as conflicted as he was? As the day drew to a close, Alexander's mind was in turmoil. Every step he took through the labyrinthine corridors of his headquarters confirmed his growing suspicion that betrayal was everywhere. In the hushed side meetings, furtive glances and whispered exchanges in shadowed hallways, the signs of conspiracy were impossible to ignore. Determined not to let the enemy within gain the upper hand, he began gathering evidence, emails, memos, and confidential reports that hinted at collusion and treachery. Each piece of evidence was a puzzle fragment, slowly coalescing into a picture of deceit that ran deeper than he had ever imagined. With the evidence meticulously laid out on his desk, Alexander sat back in his chair, a mixture of sorrow and steely resolve etched across his face. The betrayal was not just a personal affront, it was a threat to everything he had built over the years. In that moment, the decision was clear. He would root out the traitor within his ranks, no matter the cost. The battle for loyalty had become a battle for his very soul, and he was determined to emerge victorious. Just as Alexander believes he's pieced together the betrayal, a familiar face from his past appears at his office door with a cryptic smile, hinting that the lines between friend and foe may be even blurrier than he thought. The day's turmoil had not yet abated when the door to Alexander's office creaked open, revealing a face he had hoped to forget. Standing in the doorway was Marcus, an old associate from his early years, a man whose loyalty had once been unassailable but whose eyes now shimmered with secrets and something unspoken. His cryptic smile, both welcoming and unsettling, immediately stirred questions in Alexander's mind. "Marcus," Alexander said slowly, his voice steady, yet laced with a guarded curiosity. "It's been a long time. What brings you here?" Marcus stepped inside, closing the door behind him. "I've come with answers," he replied quietly, his tone low. "Answers that might explain the betrayals that have been tearing this company apart, and perhaps even parts of your past you thought were buried." A tense silence settled between them as Alexander motioned for Marcus to take a seat. The air in the room grew heavy with anticipation and the faint scent of leather-bound books from the old file cabinets lining the wall. "I'm listening," Alexander said, his eyes narrowing as he tried to read the depths of his former friend's expression. Over the next half hour, Marcus recounted fragments of long-forgotten events, clandestine deals, promises made in the dark, and a secret that linked the current sabotage with a chapter of Alexander's life he had long tried to bury. Every word was laced with regret and urgency. "You see, Alex, the betrayal you're facing isn't random," Marcus insisted. "It's all tied to decisions made back when you were still a young man, when you believed you could control everything with sheer force of will. There were alliances forged and broken in ways that still echo today." Those words resonated deeply with Alexander, forcing him to re-examine old files and digital archives late into the night. Back at his desk, under the dim glow of a single lamp, he pored over documents that had lain dormant in his secure server. Each scanned file, each faded photograph, was a piece of a puzzle he had long ignored. There were hints of secret meetings, cryptic correspondences with names he no longer recognized, and details that suggested his past was more entangled with the present than he had ever dared to admit. Determined to connect the dots, Alexander arranged a clandestine meeting at a deserted warehouse on the outskirts of the city. The building's exterior was battered by time and neglect, its broken windows and peeling paint setting the stage for revelations born out of darkness. Inside, in a vast space illuminated only by a few flickering overhead lights, a shadowy figure waited. The informant, whose voice was barely more than a whisper in the cavernous silence, slid a manila envelope across a dusty table. "These documents," the stranger murmured, "show that the existence of your triplets was not a mere accident. They're part of a larger scheme, one that was set in motion long before you became the man you are today." With trembling hands, Alexander opened the envelope. The contents were damning: detailed timelines, handwritten notes, and contracts that hinted at hidden alliances and covert operations. In the low light, he carefully pieced together conflicting timelines that spanned decades. Each new discovery deepened the mystery. He found references to secret investments, coded names, and hints of a network of conspiracies that bridged his personal life and corporate empire. The evidence painted a picture of betrayal so vast that it chilled him to the bone. Back at the headquarters the following day, tensions had reached a boiling point. In a heated confrontation in the boardroom, Alexander found himself face to face with a suspicious board member whose tone was accusatory and sharp. "You think you know the full story?" the man demanded, his voice rising in anger. "Perhaps you'd be better off admitting that your own past is bleeding into your decisions. You've allowed personal distractions to compromise your leadership." Alexander's eyes flashed with a mix of anger and hurt. "I have nothing to hide," he retorted. "But if you have evidence to support your claims, then speak it plainly." The argument escalated until voices echoed off the polished walls, each accusation fueling the other. It was a collision of ideals and hidden motives, a struggle over control and trust. Amid this corporate tempest, Valerie Monroe managed to slip discreetly into the conversation. With a quiet urgency, she pressed a small USB drive into Alexander's hand. "Alex, I recorded a conversation last night," she confided softly, her eyes earnest yet shadowed by uncertainty. "It confirms that some of our adversaries have formed a secret alliance. Listen carefully. You'll hear names and plans that will change everything." Later that night, under the shroud of darkness, Alexander found himself driving to a dimly lit parking garage. There, in a secluded corner away from prying eyes, he met an anonymous contact. In hushed tones and with the urgency of whispered confessions, the contact revealed veiled threats and half-truths about the conspiracies swirling around him. "They're not just trying to bring you down, Mr. Sterling," the voice murmured, echoing off concrete walls. "They're aiming to dismantle everything you hold dear, your company, your legacy, and your family." The warnings, laced with a sense of impending danger, left Alexander reeling and questioning whom he could truly trust. As these revelations cascaded into his present, flashes of his younger self began to intrude upon his thoughts. In a vivid flashback, Alexander saw himself as a man of passion and ambition, a younger version whose vulnerabilities were raw and unguarded. It was a time when he had believed wholeheartedly in the power of dreams and promises, not yet hardened by the betrayals of the world. That memory, though distant, now served as a stark reminder that his current manipulations were rooted in decisions made long ago, when trust had been given freely and ideals had not yet been tarnished by the relentless pursuit of power. The past and present collided when his phone rang unexpectedly. The screen displayed an unknown number, and as Alexander answered, a cold, distorted voice issued a dire warning. "Mr. Sterling, your allies are not what they seem. Question every hand that reaches out to you. The danger is closer than you think." The call ended abruptly, leaving Alexander with a lingering sense of dread and the realization that every person in his circle might be a potential threat. In the midst of these revelations, the mysterious token he had received from the triplets resurfaced. Out of the blue, it began to glow with an eerie light. Attached to it was a small note scrawled in hurried handwriting. "Its power is not benign. It holds a secret that can change everything." The token, once a simple reminder of the family he had long neglected, now pulsed with a significance that hinted at far more dangerous implications. That same night, Alexander was drawn to a secluded rooftop high above the city, a place where the ruthless tactics of his enemies were laid bare. In the cold, unforgiving air of the rooftop, he witnessed a clandestine meeting between figures whose faces were shrouded in shadow. The conversation was terse and violent in its implications. As one of the conspirators detailed plans of sabotage and retribution, the brutal determination in their voices sent a chill through him. It was clear that these enemies would stop at nothing to see his empire crumble, using methods that were as brutal as they were calculated. Inside, Alexander wrestled with his own inner turmoil. The weight of his corporate responsibilities was now inextricably linked with the desperate need to protect his newfound family. Each decision became a balancing act, a struggle between preserving the legacy of a multi-million-dollar empire and safeguarding the tender lives that had suddenly entered his world. The realization that his enemies were willing to sacrifice everything for their own gain left him feeling isolated, caught between the cold logic of corporate warfare and the raw, emotional pull of blood ties. Desperation led him to one final secret rendezvous with an old confidant, Caroline, a woman who had once been his most trusted advisor and whose insight had always been razor-sharp. In the dim light of a private dining room in an obscure part of the city, Caroline laid out a new lead. "There is someone orchestrating all of this," she said softly, her eyes never leaving his. "I've uncovered references to a mastermind, a puppeteer who has been pulling strings behind the scenes for years. Their influence is far more extensive than you suspect." Caroline's words ignited a spark of determination in Alexander. Here, finally, was a clue that might explain the labyrinth of betrayals, the covert alliances, and the dark undercurrents that now threatened to consume him. In a final, climactic moment that would test both his physical and emotional limits, Alexander found himself in a dimly lit corridor of his headquarters. The passageway was narrow and shadowed, its silence broken only by the echo of his footsteps. Suddenly, without warning, a figure lunged from the darkness. A brutal confrontation erupted. Fists flew, and in the chaos, Alexander was caught off guard. Blood trickled down his face as he fought back with every ounce of strength, driven by a burning resolve that surpassed pain and fatigue. The altercation was raw and unrelenting, a physical manifestation of the internal battle waging within him. When the struggle finally subsided, Alexander stood in the corridor, bloodied but unbowed, his heart pounding with the certainty that he had just been reminded of the price of loyalty and the cost of betrayal. Bruised and resolute, Alexander clutches the new lead, a cryptic reference to a mastermind who is shockingly close, and vows to uncover the identity before everything collapses. The tension of the day still clung to Alexander as he stepped out of the boardroom, his face marked with both fresh bruises and deep emotional scars. The meeting had dissolved into chaos, a tempest of accusations and whispered betrayals that left him reeling. As he exited through the polished glass doors of Sterling Industries, the storm outside seemed to mirror the turmoil within. Rain hammered the windows and drummed on the pavement, each drop a reminder that nature herself was echoing the fury of his crumbling world. In that moment, the roar of the storm mixed with the clamor of his thoughts. His heart pounded as he pulled out his phone, only to be met with an urgent, frantic call. The voice on the other end was strained and breathless. "Mr. Sterling, there's been a major breach at the central data hub. Our assets are under attack. We've lost control of key operations." The words were clipped, filled with an urgency that sent a chill down Alexander's spine. He gripped the phone tightly, the weight of this new threat compounding the earlier betrayals. Without hesitation, Alexander left the imposing building and made his way to the back entrance of his headquarters. The storm had transformed the familiar corridors into a dark labyrinth of slick, rain-soaked pavement. As he rounded a corner, his eyes caught movement in a narrow, shadowed alley. Figures dressed in dark, indistinct clothing moved with a purpose that left no doubt. They were not there by chance. Their faces were hidden beneath masks, their intent unmistakably hostile. Before Alexander could react, one of the figures stepped forward, blocking his path. "You shouldn't have come back here, Mr. Sterling," the masked leader said, his voice muffled but cold. "Your time is up." Instinctively, Alexander braced himself as the first blow landed, a swift, brutal strike that sent him stumbling backward onto the rain-slicked pavement. The downpour intensified, washing over him as he fought to regain his footing. In the chaos that followed, a flurry of fists and desperate shouts filled the narrow alley. Alexander's body ached with each blow, his vision blurred by both the rain and the raw fury of the encounter. Amid the barrage, a sharp cry rang out, and he caught a glimpse of a figure rushing to his aid, a trusted colleague whose face he recognized from years of working side by side in the ruthless corporate arena. "Hold on, Alex!" the colleague shouted, stepping between Alexander and his attackers. With a few decisive moves, the ally managed to deflect the next attack, allowing Alexander a moment to recover. The confrontation was fierce and unyielding. Every move felt like a desperate dance of survival, each punch a reminder of the ever-looming danger that had seeped into every corner of his life. Finally, after what felt like an eternity of brutal exchanges, the masked assailants retreated into the darkness, leaving Alexander and his colleague alone amid the puddles of rain. Breathing heavily, Alexander leaned against the cold brick wall, his heart still racing. "Who were they?" he demanded between labored breaths. "Mercenaries, I think," his colleague replied, his tone grim. "Someone sending a very clear message." Realizing that staying on the rain-soaked streets was no longer an option, Alexander nodded and signaled for his colleague to help him to a safe house he had arranged earlier, a secure, nondescript building away from the relentless glare of the city and the prying eyes of potential traitors. The journey there was a blur of headlights and rain, the city's neon reflections merging with the storm's fury into a disorienting kaleidoscope. Inside the safe house, the atmosphere was thick with apprehension. The dim, muted lighting and the heavy scent of dampness provided little comfort as Alexander sank into a worn leather chair. His mind churned with the events of the past hours, a chaotic mosaic of corporate betrayal, personal attack, and the painful realization that every aspect of his life was under siege. Amid the relative silence, one object in the room drew his attention: the mysterious token, its surface now pulsing with an eerie, almost hypnotic glow. The token had been a silent herald of his new reality, a symbol of the secret legacy that bound him to the Triplets and hinted at a larger, darker conspiracy. The token's glow flickered softly against the backdrop of the safe house, its light both beautiful and menacing. Alexander held it in his hand for a long, silent moment, as if drawing strength from its enigmatic presence. But the peace was short-lived. In a hushed voice that barely rose above the sound of the storm outside, a knock echoed from the back of the safe house. Warily, Alexander made his way to a concealed door and opened it to reveal a narrow staircase leading down into a hidden basement. There, in the low light of the subterranean chamber, a shadowy figure awaited him. The figure's face was obscured by darkness and a deep hood, but their presence exuded an authority that commanded attention. "Mr. Sterling," the figure said softly, "I have information that might explain everything: the orchestrated attacks, the betrayals, and the mysterious forces at work." With deliberate movements, the figure handed Alexander a small stack of documents and a data drive. "These will show you the layers of this conspiracy and why your enemies have been one step ahead at every turn." Alexander's eyes narrowed as he flipped through the documents. The pages were filled with detailed accounts, dates, and names, a web of connections that stretched back decades, tying his personal past to the current corporate warfare. The weight of the information was staggering. Every new piece of evidence added to the picture of a meticulously orchestrated assault, a plan designed to dismantle not only his empire but the very foundations of his identity. Emerging from the basement, Alexander was struck by the unsettling realization that every move he had made seemed anticipated. It was as if unseen adversaries were always several steps ahead, turning his world into a chessboard where every piece was both a target and a pawn. His thoughts were interrupted by the shrill ring of his phone. The display showed a familiar name, one of the Triplets. With a trembling hand, he answered, and a small, tearful voice filled the line. "Dad, I'm sorry, I miss you," the child said, his voice quavering with emotion. In that tender moment, Alexander felt the full brunt of his neglect. The words, filled with both longing and hurt, struck him like a physical blow. His eyes stung with unshed tears as he realized the personal cost of his absence, an absence that had allowed darkness to creep into the heart of his family. After ending the call, Alexander's phone buzzed once again. This time, it was Valerie. In the sparse light of the safe house, her voice came through in a hushed, urgent whisper. "Alex, we need to talk. I'm not just a bystander in this war, you know that. I have personal stakes here too. There are things I haven't told you, and they might change everything." The vulnerability in her tone was palpable, and for a moment, Alexander allowed himself to hope that she might be the ally he desperately needed. Before they could arrange a face-to-face meeting, a sudden flash of lightning illuminated a small corner of the safe house. In that brief, stark light, Alexander's gaze was drawn to a torn family photo pinned to a peeling wall. The image was fragmented, its edges burnt and tattered, but it depicted a moment of unguarded happiness, a time when family had meant something pure and uncorrupted. The sight of it stirred a deep ache within him, a reminder of what he stood to lose if the conspiracies and betrayals were allowed to succeed. That realization spurred him into action. With a newfound urgency, Alexander began gathering those loyal to him, summoning a final, desperate strategy session. In a dimly lit conference room within the safe house, he met with his remaining trusted allies, faces marked by worry, determination, and the scars of recent battles. Over maps, digital displays, and hastily scribbled notes, they plotted their counteroffensive against the unseen forces that had waged war against him. "We are at a crossroads," Alexander addressed the group, his voice firm despite the exhaustion etched into every line of his face. "This isn't just about our company or our legacy, it's about everything we hold dear. We fight not only for the empire we've built, but for the family we've been forced to neglect. I need every one of you to stand with me, to be vigilant and relentless. Today, we make one last push to reclaim what is ours." The room buzzed with a mixture of resolve and apprehension as they set plans into motion. Each strategy discussed, every contingency planned, was laced with the tension of a man who knew that failure was not an option. The weight of the moment pressed down on Alexander like the relentless rain outside, a constant reminder that time was running short and the enemy was closing in from every side. Finally, with the plan solidified and his allies rallied around him, Alexander stepped out of the safe house into the tempest. The storm raged around him, the wind howling and the rain lashing at his face. Yet with each step he took, a hardened determination settled over him. The fury of the elements was no longer just a mirror of his inner chaos. It was a battleground upon which he would reclaim his life. As he strode into the maelstrom, every fiber of his being pulsed with the resolve to risk everything, to fight back against the darkness threatening to consume him. In the midst of the storm's fury, a single chilling message arrives on his phone. "Choose now, your empire or your family." Alexander stood alone in the darkened boardroom, the silence pressing in around him like a tangible weight. The room, usually filled with the hum of strategic discussions and the clatter of determined footsteps, now felt like a crossroads, a stage set for decisions that would define the future of his empire. In that quiet, reflective moment, the ultimatum he'd received echoed in his mind. The choice between saving his corporate legacy or salvaging the fragile bonds of family he had neglected for too long. Later that evening, Seeking solace from the relentless pressures of boardroom battles, Alexander retreated to a more intimate space, a warmly lit living room in a private section of his sprawling estate. There, waiting for him with cautious hope, were the triplets. The children, once distant and timid, now looked up at him with eyes filled with both longing and tentative forgiveness. In the soft glow of a single lamp, their small hands reached out, seeking the touch of a father they had barely known. Alexander knelt down, enveloping them in a gentle embrace that was as much an apology as it was a promise of redemption. For a long moment, all the past betrayals and corporate intrigues faded away, replaced by the genuine warmth and quiet possibility of healing through family unity. Their innocent voices, whispered thanks and hopeful questions, reminded him that there was something far more enduring than the fleeting power of wealth: love. Inspired by that tender encounter, Alexander later met with one of his oldest and most trusted allies, Jonathan, in the quiet privacy of his study. Over cups of rich, dark coffee and amidst the soft rustling of turning pages from an old ledger, Jonathan's voice carried both concern and unwavering loyalty. "Alex, I've seen you transform before," Jonathan said, his tone earnest. "Your legacy isn't solely about the empire you've built. It's about the choices you make now, about responsibility and compassion. You have the chance to turn everything around, not just for the company, but for the people who matter most to you." In that heartfelt conversation, Alexander's hardened exterior began to crack, revealing the man who was willing to risk everything for a renewed sense of purpose. The next day, the stage was set for a meticulously planned showdown in the boardroom. Alexander gathered the key players, those whose loyalty had wavered and those whose hidden agendas had come to light, and laid bare the betrayals and manipulations that had plagued him. The room, filled with stern faces and wary eyes, became a battlefield of words and revelations. Standing at the head of the table, Alexander spoke with a clear, resolute tone that brooked no dissent. "Over the past few months, I've uncovered evidence of covert alliances, of secret deals made at my expense," he began, his gaze sweeping the room. "Every misstep, every act of betrayal, has been orchestrated by those who sought to undermine not just my leadership, but the very integrity of our company." His words cut through the murmurs like a knife. The tension in the room was palpable as executives exchanged uneasy glances, the veneer of professionalism beginning to crack under the weight of his accusations. At that moment, Valerie Monroe, who had long been both a trusted advisor and an enigmatic presence, stood up. Her eyes were open with a mix of regret and resolve. "Alex, there's something you need to know," she confessed, her voice trembling with both sorrow and determination. "I've been wrestling with my own demons, and I must admit, I've kept secrets that have only now come to light. There is someone among us, someone very close, who has been manipulating events behind the scenes. I couldn't bring myself to believe it at first, but the evidence is undeniable." Her confession, raw and unfiltered, redefined the enemy's true identity, and for a moment, the room fell into a stunned silence. But the revelation did not break Alexander's resolve. Instead, it galvanized him. Trusted associates, emboldened by his determination, began to rally around him. Heads nodded in silent agreement, and subtle affirmations of support passed from one person to another. With renewed vigor, he led them into a sleek, modern war room, a space bathed in cool blue light and lined with digital displays mapping out every strategic move. There, alongside Jonathan and his most loyal team members, Alexander mapped out the next steps to reclaim both his company and his honor. As they pored over digital schematics and detailed timelines, a sudden flash of memory overtook him, a vivid flashback to his youth. He remembered a time when his heart had been full of dreams and ideals, when he believed in the purity of ambition and the unyielding power of truth. In those early days, before the weight of corporate power had hardened him, Alexander had been a man who trusted freely and loved without reservation. The memory fueled his current resolve, intertwining the innocence of the past with the determination of the present. In the midst of these strategic discussions, a tense negotiation unfolded in a glass-walled conference room with one of his key rivals, a man known for his ruthless business tactics and icy demeanor. The atmosphere was electric as the two men faced off, the transparent walls symbolizing the thin line between trust and treachery. Alexander balanced empathy with a newfound ruthlessness, articulating his terms with a clarity that left little room for ambiguity. "Our future isn't defined by past mistakes," he declared, his voice calm yet forceful. "It's defined by the choices we make today. I invite you to join me in forging a path forward that honors our legacy and protects what we've built. But know this, I will not tolerate any further betrayal." The rival's eyes narrowed, and for a tense moment, it was as if the entire room held its breath. Throughout the day, Alexander's gaze often drifted to the mysterious token that had come into his possession, a small, seemingly innocuous object that now pulsed with a faint, almost ethereal glow. As he held it between his fingers, the token revealed itself to be more than just a reminder of the triplets. It was a symbolic key. Slowly, its glow began to make sense. It represented a secret that had undermined his empire all along, a connection to forces both personal and insidious. The realization was as startling as it was profound, weaving together the threads of his past and the chaos of his present. Just as the strategic meeting was winding down, Alexander's phone rang sharply, jolting him from his thoughts. The caller was unknown, but the voice that answered was unmistakable, a cold, measured tone that belonged to the elusive mastermind behind the orchestrated chaos. "Mr. Sterling," the voice intoned, "you have been a formidable adversary, but your time is nearly up. The final pieces of the puzzle are falling into place, and soon you will understand the full scope of your own downfall." The call ended abruptly, leaving Alexander momentarily rattled. It was a direct challenge, a confrontation with the source of the chaos that had haunted him for so long. Not long after, a dramatic confrontation erupted in a sleek office space, a carefully arranged trap set for him by the mastermind's proxy. In that modern, glass-encased room, the air was thick with tension. The proxy, a lithe and dangerous figure, launched a surprise attack. Fists flew and a struggle ensued, the clash echoing off the pristine walls. Alexander fought back with a ferocity born of desperation and newfound purpose. Each blow he struck was not just a rejection of physical violence, but a symbolic rejection of the betrayal that had undermined his life. The fight was brutal and unrelenting, testing every ounce of strength he had left. In the end, bloodied and exhausted, he managed to subdue his assailant, a hard-won victory that served as a stark reminder of the stakes at hand. Throughout the ordeal, the triplets remained a constant guiding presence in his thoughts. Their faces, etched in his memory from that earlier quiet moment, served as both a moral compass and a source of strength. Their silent, unspoken support bolstered his resolve, reminding him why he was fighting. Not just for the empire, but for a future where family and love could coexist with ambition and power. In the aftermath of the confrontation, as Alexander tended to his wounds in the quiet solitude of his private office, his internal monologue flowed freely. He reflected on the journey that had brought him from the detached, calculated billionaire he once was to the man who now stood willing to risk everything for love, legacy, and redemption. Each scar, both physical and emotional, was a testament to the battles fought and the lessons learned. In that moment of introspection, he realized that true strength lay not in isolation, but in embracing vulnerability and the courage to change. Gathering every shred of his determination, Alexander convened one final meeting with his closest advisors. In a decisive moment that would alter the course of his future, he unveiled a counter-strategy, one that was as bold as it was calculated. With unwavering conviction, he outlined his plan to dismantle the conspiracies that had threatened to tear his world apart. His words, delivered with both empathy and an iron will, resonated in the hushed room. The plan was clear: expose the traitors, fortify his defenses, and reclaim the legacy that was rightfully his. The revelation left his enemies reeling, and in that moment, a fragile but real victory was achieved. Just as victory seems within reach, a final revelation is broadcast on a company-wide screen, a cryptic message implicating someone in Alexander's inner circle as the true mastermind, leaving him questioning every ally he once trusted. At dawn's first light, the weight of everything seemed to bear down on Alexander like a crushing tide. In the solitude of his expansive yet cold penthouse, he sat slumped at his desk, staring blankly at the scattered documents and photographs that told the story of a life once filled with promise, but now marred by betrayal and heartache. Every piece of evidence he had painstakingly gathered over the past months, every email, every hushed confession, every incriminating document, spoke of a conspiracy that reached deep into the fabric of his world. In that lonely moment, with the remnants of his empire crumbling like dust around him, Alexander found himself at his absolute lowest point. The losses, the betrayals, and the crushing realization that even his closest allies had turned their backs on him converged into a hopeless silence that filled the room. He remembered the quiet desperation of the past weeks, the relentless assault on his reputation, the physical confrontations in dark corridors, and the final searing message broadcast across his company's screens that had shattered his sense of certainty. The man who had once ruled boardrooms with an iron fist now felt more fragile than ever, a man haunted by the ghosts of his past mistakes and the immense responsibilities he had long neglected. In that moment of despair, as he stared out through the floor-to-ceiling windows at a city that seemed indifferent to his suffering, Alexander understood that he had reached the nadir of his existence. But in the depths of his desolation, a spark of determination began to kindle. In the quiet hum of his thoughts, he recalled the faces of the triplets, the small, hopeful eyes that had looked up to him with a mixture of longing and forgiveness. Their presence, their silent trust, and the innocence of their unspoken pleas stirred something deep within him. He could no longer hide behind the fortress of corporate ambition and calculated power. He had to make one final, decisive move, a move that would not only salvage his crumbling empire but also restore the fractured bonds of family he had so long ignored. With a slow, deliberate exhale, Alexander rose from his chair. The transformation was not immediate or dramatic, but it was profound. In that moment, he resolved to embrace his vulnerabilities and to fight back with the full force of his intelligence, experience, and newfound compassion. He began by methodically gathering the remaining loyal members of his inner circle, those whose faces still shone with determination and whose hearts had not yet hardened completely by the relentless battles of the past months. In a secure conference room within the safe house he had secured, Alexander addressed the group with a voice that carried both the weight of regret and the strength of resolve. "We have reached a crossroads," he began, his eyes sweeping over the gathered allies. "Everything I built, this company, our legacy, and even my own identity, has been shaken to its core. But today, we choose to rebuild, not by clinging to the old ways, but by forging a new path that honors our past and secures our future. I have learned that true strength does not come from hiding behind wealth or power. It comes from the courage to face our mistakes, to embrace our responsibilities, and to protect what truly matters." As he spoke, the room filled with an energy that had been absent for too long, a quiet, steady determination that reassured him that he was not fighting this battle alone. His trusted colleagues listened intently, their faces etched with the memories of shared hardships and the glimmer of hope that now began to shine through the darkness. Among them, Jonathan nodded with quiet affirmation, and even those who had once harbored doubts now seemed to draw strength from his words. Over the following hours, Alexander set his counteroffensive into motion. With meticulous care, he began dismantling the web of conspiracies that had been spun around him. Every piece of evidence was re-examined, every discrepancy followed up on, until the hidden threads of betrayal began to unravel. As the strategy unfolded, Alexander made a startling discovery that cut through the haze of deception, a final twist that redefined the nature of the conflict. In reviewing a series of covert communications, he realized that the mastermind behind the orchestrated attacks was not some faceless enemy from outside, but rather someone from within his own inner circle. The revelation was a bitter pill. Someone he had once trusted implicitly had been the architect of his downfall. The shock of this discovery sent a jolt through him, but it also steeled his resolve. With his newfound clarity, Alexander confronted the traitor during an emergency meeting convened with the top echelons of his company. In a sleek, modern conference room bathed in cool blue light, he laid out the incontrovertible evidence before everyone's eyes. The atmosphere was thick with tension as names were mentioned, timelines confirmed, and hidden motives laid bare for all to see. "Everything has been orchestrated," Alexander said firmly, his voice resonating with both sorrow and determination. "The betrayal runs deeper than we ever imagined, but I will not allow this treachery to define our future. We will purge this rot, rebuild our trust, and emerge stronger from this crucible." The revelation hit the room like a sledgehammer, leaving colleagues in stunned silence as they processed the truth. The traitor, whose identity had been so meticulously concealed, now had no choice but to face the consequences of their actions. In that charged moment, the office transformed from a battleground of corporate intrigue into a space of reckoning and renewal. As the traitor was escorted away and accountability was established, the foundation of Sterling Industries began to solidify once again, built on a newfound sense of unity and transparency. Amid these sweeping changes, Alexander made it a priority to reach out to the Triplets, determined to repair the personal damage that had been inflicted by years of absence. One sunny afternoon, he arranged a quiet, heartfelt meeting in a small park near their home, a place where nature's gentle beauty could soothe old wounds. Sitting on a worn wooden bench beneath a sprawling oak tree, he listened as each of the children shared their thoughts, fears, and dreams. Their voices, soft and sincere, were a testament to the resilience of the human spirit. With each passing moment, Alexander felt the long-closed door of his heart creak open, allowing love and vulnerability to flow in where pride had once reigned unchallenged. "I know I haven't been there for you," he murmured, his eyes glistening with unshed tears as he looked into the innocent faces before him. "But I promise that from now on, I will be the father you deserve, a father who listens, who cares, and who will always stand by you." The children's tentative smiles and soft nods spoke volumes. They forgave him, and in their forgiveness, he found the strength to embrace his new reality. In the wake of these personal reconciliations, the corporate and familial threads of his life began to weave together into a tapestry of renewed purpose. Alexander set about closing every loose end. Contracts were renegotiated, hostile board members were sidelined, and every lingering question was met with honest answers. The transformation was evident not only in the rebuilt trust among his colleagues but also in the steady warmth that now radiated from him, a warmth born of humility, understanding, and the hard-won lessons of his past. Yet just when it seemed that every conflict had been resolved and every mystery laid to rest, the final twist came to light in a way that no one could have foreseen. During what was meant to be a celebratory meeting marking the dawn of a new era for Sterling Industries, the company-wide screen suddenly flickered to life. On it appeared a series of cryptic images and messages, each one pointing unmistakably to a shocking truth. The true mastermind behind the chaos was not an external adversary, but an insider whose identity had been hidden in plain sight. The broadcast was brief, yet explosive. a final act of revelation that left Alexander and everyone in the room questioning every alliance and every vow of loyalty. The room fell into a stunned silence as the implications sank in. The revelation was not just a twist, it was the final piece of a puzzle that had taken years to assemble. In that charged moment, Alexander's heart pounded not with the despair of defeat but with the fierce determination to rise again. He realized that his journey had come full circle. The vulnerabilities he had once feared were now the very source of his strength, and the love he had once neglected had transformed into an unbreakable shield against the forces that had sought to destroy him. Standing in that moment of both resolution and profound uncertainty, Alexander felt the weight of the past lift ever so slightly. His transformation was complete. Not only had he reclaimed his empire, but he had also embraced the responsibilities of fatherhood and personal redemption. The scars of betrayal, though still visible, served as reminders of the battles he had fought and the lessons he had learned. In a final, cathartic moment, Alexander stepped away from the meeting, his eyes briefly meeting those of his allies and the remnants of his former adversaries. With one last look at the screen that had delivered the final, crushing twist, he knew that his journey was far from over. Every scar, every betrayal, every moment of vulnerability had forged him into a man capable of weathering any storm. And as he prepared to step into the uncertain future, a sense of calm determination filled him. As the sun climbs higher, Alexander turns to face his future with a quiet, resolute smile, and a final enigmatic message on his phone hints that even in resolution, life's mysteries may never fully be laid to rest.
If you enjoyed this story, don't miss the next one. Just click on the screen.